Hey there, my friends. So, what is sales therapy? How does sales therapy help us? Do we actually have to sit on a couch? What do we have to do? Is there somebody speaking in our ear? And not to mention, does it go all the way back to our parents? Today on Sales Chatter. Hey, my friends, welcome back. And that was a little bit of a comedic intro. I thought that was funny. I don't care who you are, that there's funny right there. But today I've got Vivek with me, who runs Sales Therapy LLC. Vivek, thanks so much for coming to the show. You know, Sean Matthews set us up. We were just talking about how awesome Sean is. I was talking about how mellow his tone is. And we had a show, and when he was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I don't think his voice went above this tone right here. And it was so cool that I was even saying, Sean, just an FYI, I was even saying, like, it'd be cool to have him talk to you while you go to sleep. Not that he's boring, but that it's just like that mellow, calm, cool, collected kind of voice. And I often listen to audiobooks as I go to bed. And after I hung up with him, I said he would be an awesome audiobook reader, because just that voice would just be so cool. So thanks for being here, my man. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Dan, thanks so much. That was a fantastic intro, and I agree with you. Sean's so cool. Yeah, he's such a awesome guy. You know, his personality is so this thing. We had a very funny way of meeting, and then he reached out to me a few weeks ago. And it's been just fantastic talking to him. He's such an awesome person. Yeah.
And on a good mission too.
Yeah. And he has a lot going on. He's, connecting a lot of people. I think that's a fantastic thing to do. We in our industry tend to be a bit more siloed. People are inward looking to a large extent. I'm guilty of this. When I worked for Kuehne+Nagel, for the longest ever time, I never looked outside. And things were great while you're there. The moment you step out of this microcosm, so to speak, you realize there's an entire world out there which you can contribute to. So,
it's interesting you say that, Vivek, because when I first started in the industry, all I knew was the people in my company and my customers. And when we would go to events like the Montreal Traffic Club event or golf tournaments, you'd always bring customers. You would never, ever network. Now, some people network, but it was more with customers as opposed to people from different companies. And it was interesting because when I left Montreal and came to Toronto, I went to work for an asset-based company. And all he did, the owner, was bring me to networking events. Like when we went to golf tournaments, he's like, I want you to go around and just talk to everyone. And I started to meet a ton of people in the industry, like prospects, competition, I guess you can say, clients, like suppliers, everything. And it was a totally different world. But you're absolutely right. Now that you bring that up, brokerage is very siloed. It's as if, well, if I communicate with you, then you're the competition. You're going to find out something about my business. And it's like, it's everything so close to the chest. Does that make sense?
It does. Then I agree with you, Dan. It's people are to a certain extent, I can understand the hesitation. However, it does not need to be to the level we are at. Dan, not to go on a segue, but one other way to put this into perspective. We as an industry have a perception problem.
Yes.
We are considered dry and totally not sexy. And once you're in it, you realize that this is so much fun. Even though we are such a homogeneous product, still the nuances and the sheer variety of problems are just, I'm doing this for 27 years, and there's not a single day where I'm like, oh man, this is so boring, the same old crap, This does not happen. So for us to, at least for some people, I strongly believe we have a responsibility to step outside a little bit from our silos, from our firms, and put the word out there that it's not as dry and boring as you may perceive it from outside. And the only way you can do that is by talking to people, and LinkedIn is great for that. But there are so many other avenues for people to talk to more people who are not from the industry and actually make a name for our industry.
It's interesting you bring that up because I can't, I mean, I couldn't even count how many times I would speak to people and they say, oh, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm in logistics. They're like, oh, you mean like you move product from one place to the next? And I'm like, well, yeah, in essence, but it goes a lot deeper. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. And it's kind of like the conversation's over. And I want to scream from the top of my lungs, like, don't you understand? This is the best industry on the planet. Like, do a 360. Everything you see is touch the truck. Do you realize that we wouldn't have clean water if the trucks didn't run for like 2 weeks? Do you realize that the world would implode because nuclear power stations and everything would blow up in like a month and a half if we didn't have? And I want to get into all of that, but it literally hits them like a deer in a headlight. And they're like, okay. And I could see in their eyes, like, I want to get away from this conversation as quick as possible. So I tend to have to wind myself back when I get into industry jargon and talk. And there's been a few people that I've sat with that are in the industry. And it'll be like 45 minutes later, and my wife will be like, are we going to talk about something else? I'm like, oh, I forgot whoever was around, and it's just, I don't know. I guess, I mean, you're probably biased like myself. I've been in the industry 30 years. It's all I've ever done. So I say it's the best industry. I've got a little bit of bias in there, but when I do think about it, nothing revolves without our industry. And I've thought about this when it comes to like pharmaceuticals. Yes, there's a real good position for pharmaceuticals in the world. There's some people where it's naturopath and all that. So pharmaceuticals doesn't impact them. But to me, it's almost as if logistics is the only industry on the planet that has a significant impact in everybody that walks the earth.
100%.
And can you think of any other business besides ours that has that impact? I can't. And again, maybe I'm biased to it.
You're spot on, Dan. Without any biases, after a certain point, when you're biased, when you start thinking like this, you realize that there is really nothing much out there that impacts each and every person at the most granular level in their day-to-day lives as much as logistics does. Yeah. And this is where I feel that as an industry, we do not have the recognition, and we're still probably to a certain extent a lack of respect.
Yep.
And you will have certain places which don't do much for the planet, and they get respect. Not to say I'm looking down at something. If suddenly you're working for the fashion industry and you're in this fancy shop in New York, and you have a lot more respect than somebody who's making sure there's shirts on shelves and toilet paper available to everybody, which impact you. This thing. So,
or that makes sure that store has the clothes to sell to people.
Yeah,
and people
but
don't think of that.
Yeah, but you will not get the respect. So you can't stop trying. This is where I'm coming from. Back to what we were saying. We are so inward looking in our own firms, in our own industry. I think, I made a blog out of this. Was like, we are the only industry that have not had a TV series. I think we deserve a TV series, right? To maybe sex it up, yeah. Do a Suits version of.
Well, we have Ice Road Truckers.
Yeah,
right? We got that up in the north, but it's, what, I agree. And I think there's I think also we've done a horrible job as an industry marketing it.
Yes.
Specifically the truck driving aspect, like the actual Marines in the ditches, fighting the good fight. I've been on both sides, proverbial both sides of the fence, if you will. And I can tell you on the asset side, and I don't know if you've ever been on the asset side, Vivek, but on the asset side, like, there's so many things that can happen on one trip. I mean, I remember vividly for a large brake manufacturer, we were dealing with a broker when I was on my asset side. And this is literally a week after I started at the asset company. So I'd done almost 10 years in brokerage, right? And heard every story. Turbo blew, driver got sick en route, all the stories. And, for those of you not watching on video, the big quotations are going up. And I remember we had a team driver that was coming in. He had hit something on the road and blew a steer. So he pulls over. So what we do is, while he's getting fixed, we send a single to the location to pick up. Okay. So immediately red flags go up. They're like, what's going on? We're like, listen, this is what we could do. Our driver blew a steer in the London area. While he's getting it fixed, we're going to grab the single and head down and just do a trailer swap, the tires fixed and all that. Save a couple hours or else we won't be able to make pickup. Okay, as long as teams show up. So we do that. We switch in London, Ontario. The team starts heading south. Well, the team's going down and all of a sudden one of their coolant hoses blows. And we don't know, like something might have kicked up from the road, whatever the case may be. So now they're struggling to make it to a truck stop. And we're struggling to get another truck to save this truck and at least complete the order. Long story short, we had to do 2 swaps. So
wow.
We had drivers, you got one driver here and then, 200 miles down the road, there's another driver to intersect. And 400 miles after that, there's another driver just based on HOS. Long story short, it switches, slip seats 3 different power units to make delivery. We make delivery 2 hours late. In our books, as the asset side of it, we were like, man, we pulled that off. And we had 1 hour left before it was shut down because this was all just in time. Well, do you know the broker that we used screamed up and down because they said we used a single driver, not a team. We're going to pay you a single rate and it was interesting, Vivek, because I walked in and I had my letter of resignation from the brokerage company from 2 weeks before. I photocopied it in my hand and my business card from that company. And I sat down with the brokerage and I said, okay, guys, here's the deal. If I was not in the position I'm in this very moment, I would believe everything I told you was a lie.
Yeah.
That's how I started the conversation. And they're like, well, it is. I said, no, here. And I gave them my resignation letter for the major, it was $1 billion brokerage. And I gave them my business card. And I said, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, I said, I quit and moved to Toronto and started working. Trust me when I say I've heard the turbos blow and I've blown all this. This is exactly what happened. And the sales manager is looking at me and he's like, how can that happen? I'm like, I know. And it was actually comical because we got into how, carriers lie to brokers, brokers lie to carriers and blah, blah, blah. And again, we're talking 2003, right? So we're talking 21 years ago that I got here. And I'll never forget that story ever, because it was one of these things where if I did not witness it, meaning if I did not see the satellite image I would be like, how do you even how can you explain this where anyone would believe it? Right. It's like a truck blows a tire. It can't make pickup. Right. Can't make it. Right. So as a broker, this is how we always thought. It was always until recent, and I'm talking recent, maybe a decade, it was always, they lie. Carriers lie, brokers lie, and all that. And don't get me wrong, there's still bad seeds out there, right? But
Dan, that's a great story, and I think the DNA for a lot of people, they're taught in a particular way.
Yes.
Beat down your vendor, and it's rampant in our industry. I think to quite a large extent, even to the day. Tech has, to your point, last decade or so, with GPS, with everything that's going on, has changed the narrative. But in its core, some of it has not changed to beat down your provider.
Yeah. Well, also customers, right? If you look at just pandemic to now, and I'm willing to bet if you do a poll, the majority of shippers think they got ripped off during the pandemic because brokers were making astronomical profits, carriers were making astronomical profits, companies were losing astronomical profits, right?
But these are the same customers whose P&Ls are once in a lifetime events on their own P&L, where they had the best P&L ever. So
yes.
You can't have, there's a saying in my country where I come from, you cannot point one finger without having 3 fingers point to yourself, right? So it's very easy to beat down a logistics provider, say, oh, you guys made $10 billion, you guys made this. Look at your own P&L. Were you not making a ton load of money? It's all demand and supply. Airlines did the same thing. Everybody did the same thing. However, it's just the DNA that let's beat down the logistics provider because that's how we've done it. In fact, I made a joke out of it, which on LinkedIn once, that in our business, as long as the customer is complaining, don't worry about anything. The moment they go quiet, you know that the customer is lost. And that's true, actually, when you think about it. Because as long as these guys are complaining, you're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine. You need broad shoulders to be in our industry. If you can't take 100 times on your chin, you're in the wrong place. You're just in the wrong place.
Yep.
You're going to get it from all sides. And this is where, again, where I feel that youngsters who are trying to come into the industry, that they don't want to put up with this, and that pushes them away. It's a sad part of the industry which is still prevalent to this day. You're going to get beaten up.
That's interesting that you put it that way. I see that. I've often thought one of the big things that turns people off from our industry is we're in a very instantaneous world these days, right? Everybody wants everything now. Logistics isn't like that. Like if you're in logistics and sales, right? Hypothetically, it isn't a pick up the phone today and land a customer today. It might not even be land a customer in the next 90 days.
Right.
And you have to be good with that. And I think there's a couple of things with this. Is one, I don't think companies get into enough detail with people because they want to put bodies in seats. They want people making calls. They want loads on the board. I remember the last time I was involved in recruiting, I had to say to the recruiting manager, like, you can't talk like that. Like, I get it. You're showing them the top salesperson. And when they walk by the office, they're like, oh, this person does over $1 million in GP. And, obviously the new salesperson's calculating that commission in their head. And they're like, oh my God, that's more money than I've ever even thought I would make in like 10 years, never mind one. But do you understand what that person had to do to get there? Like, do you understand the volume of work this person had to do? Dealing with customers, like you said, that are complaining constantly. Like, you got to grow some thick skin. Not only do you have to grow some thick skin, this is a rinse and repeat like nothing else. And again, I could be biased, but the world of logistics sales, like, I don't see, besides software sales, another industry where it's such a visual decision by the traffic managers or VPs. And what I mean by visual decision is like, just like software, if somebody makes a decision to buy software that speeds up or automates things and it doesn't speed up or automate anything, it's a very visual decision by their bosses and superiors. And same thing in logistics. They bring in a logistics company. They bring in Dan Deigan Enterprises to solve their logistics problems. And Dan Deigan Enterprises has his foot up his arse and doesn't know what he's doing. They look horrible. And their image, credibility, and brand goes downhill inside that company. Yeah. And I guess you can do it if you're talking suppliers and like paint, if you count on a paint supply, but I just think the visual decision is so huge in our market that when you're prospecting, and this is a great lead into sales therapy, when you're prospecting, this is the first piece the first mountain you got to climb is that trust mountain, right? And then, I had somebody say to me once, he said, Dan, when somebody likes you, they'll give you freight. When they trust you, they'll give you business.
Correct.
And it's two completely separate things.
Very well said.
Right? Very well said. And I had to think about that for a minute. I was like, man, that's good.
Dan, you're spot on, and I love the way you correlated the visual part. That's new. That's really a nice way of putting it. To your earlier point about salespeople starting and being shown this carrot of what you can potentially be. The biggest problem that I see with so many of my clients, and not just with my clients, with across the industry, is the gestation period of a salesperson. They'll bring in a lot of bodies and go through a mandatory onboarding period.
Yep.
Where the crux of the situation starts after the onboarding is over. And this is where people tend to lose out because the teams are large or there's just not enough attention. So many mistakes are made during that critical period after onboarding until the sales guy finds their feet, finds their stomach, finds their head, finds their heart. And that period is where you actually lose a lot of people, because you're like, oh, I'm expecting that this guy is going to get 100 loads by the end of 90 days. But from day 30 after onboarding, that 60-day period, they're left on their own selves without any help to get them to that point. I think that's a leadership failure, not a sales failure.
Yes.
A good leadership program right now would ensure that you are actually joined to the hip with all these new people who come in, so that you reach that point where they are no longer joined to the hip and they can start standing on their own or swimming on their own. And that's where I strongly believe that the industry could do a lot better during this gestation period to cut that down.
I agree. I remember when I first got into it, there was really no sales training. It was go sit with this sales rep. And it was interesting because you sit with one rep, they sell one way. You sit with another rep, their method is totally different.
Exactly.
And what I did anyways, and by all means, anyone out there, please comment, let us know how you did it. But what I did is I just started emulating the one I liked the best.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, Vivek, because as I would land customers, as I would start doing business with them, and the Dan would come out as opposed to this, I call it like fake Dan that sold them. I had more than one say, you know what? I like you better than the guy I first spoke to. And one of my first customers, Bob McKenna, love him. He's still a good brother of mine. He always says it. He's like, well, which Dan's talking now? The Dan I know or the Dan that first called me, right? Because it was one of these things where I called him and the guy I was emulating was very direct. And I'm like, well, I'm your new account manager. Because I had actually, my first customer in the industry was given to me because somebody quit. And so, I'm asking, well, how do you call this person? Like, what do I say? What if he doesn't want to work with me? He goes, no. Call him, tell him you're the new account manager. The freight goes through you, you'll serve him. So I call him and says, yeah, I'm your new account manager. He goes, no. You don't tell me who my account manager is. If I like you, I'll do business with you. And Bob's from Jersey, right? So he was like, hit the nail right on the head. There's no BS. There's no messing around. And McKenna, if you're listening to this, I love you, brother. But it was one of these things where I'm like, okay. So, and he's like, no, cut the shit. Like, I'll tell you if I want to work with you or not. And I just thought that was very comical because it's not me. That's not the way I sell, but I thought that's what I had to do. I wore a shirt and tie thinking that's what I had to do. I literally emulated this man to the point where they called me mini him. And I thought it was like, oh yeah, this is the greatest thing on earth. And then when I came to my senses, I'm like, oh my Lord, like I haven't been me. And I think, there's that piece of it, Vivek. And then there's another piece where I think a lot of salespeople these days are getting pounded by management to put numbers on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens, and again, if you're just starting in sales, please let us know. But I think what also happens is they get the wrong customers in the door. And then it's frustrating. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what it's all about. I have no interest in this, like being treated like a piece of dirt. And drivers go through it every day. Call a spade a spade.
You're spot on, Dan. Unfortunately, everybody has a concept about sales training. And there's so much misconception over there. It's like, let's put 30 people into a room and go through this program and not attend to anybody's nuances or individual needs, which might be radically different for each and every of those 30 individuals in that room, because our business is very nuanced. Yep. So it will never cater to it. So following a playbook or a script, nothing could be worse, in my opinion, because what's the point to what you're saying, Dan, right? What's the point of getting 100 customers which are completely bad fit, and then you lose 97 of them within the first 90 days because you've not done 60 other things that is required to actually bring that customer on board. So,
or the infamous one where you get them and for 3 months, all you're doing is working on loads for them. And then they're only using you because of price. And you've never asked if something's going to continue long term. And then all of a sudden, 90 days later, you got no freight because the person that used to do it goes and cuts your numbers. And now you're sitting there like you were a superstar. Now you're nothing. Been there,
correct.
done that, got the t-shirt.
So we all have, and and I still encourage every salesperson to do it.
Yeah.
Because whatever you tell them, they will never learn. Unless you burn yourself, unless you get hurt yourself, unless it's very, very painful, the lesson will not be learned. So it's pointless trying to tell somebody this, that don't do this. It's actually a good thing that it happens to you early on so that you don't continue like that for 10, 15 years. You know, if the McKennas of the world actually did that to you, I would think that is the best lesson you learned early on in life, that, you know, I can't copy somebody. There's no control C, control V in our business. Let's just be myself. And if the customer doesn't like it, then really I suck. That's it. You know, there's nothing else.
Control C, control V in our business. You know, you bring up a good point. How would you know a good customer unless you had a bad customer?
Exactly. There's no way of telling you. There is no bad customer in that sense, because it's just you're not the right fit as a company. We are under this whole impression across our industry that we can always participate in every customer.
Yes.
Nothing could be further than the truth. Nothing could be further than that, actually. Yeah. So everybody's like, let me just somehow make this work. He has a truckload that needs to go to Timbuktu. But hey, there's an ocean in between. Don't worry about it. I got it. I'm going to take care of this truckload to Timbuktu.
I'm the Timbuktu master. I know everything about Timbuktu.
Yeah, I'm God at this, you know. So, and it's not, you know, so it's very, very hard. I call it the sweet spot. The pipeline sweet spot is where you do not allow a customer to come into your funnel. I hate the word funnel, but just for everybody's
come into your world.
Yeah, it's that, hey, just don't allow it to come in. And 95% of the sales guys, you know, are like, every customer is a customer. Every opportunity is an opportunity. Every quotation that goes out must be done. You know, quotations are a way for a client to say no to you.
Yeah. You know, and I think also, you know, dovetailing right off of that, obviously when somebody first comes in, very difficult to understand exactly who they can serve.
Yeah, totally agree. 100%.
Right? Like, but also there's a secondary piece to that. And I think the secondary piece could be, and I'd love your thoughts on this. You know, you walk into a company, take a couple hours and go around and meet people, you know, like take customer names out of it. What's the personality or what's the style? What's the commodity of your best customer? And maybe even go into accounting and say, hey, like our best customers, what do they pay in? What typical industry are they in? Speak to the VP of sales and ask these questions, because even if you're new, because I know what people will say, Vivek, is as soon as we said that, they'll be, yeah, but you know, that comes with experience. And it does, like the ins and outs come with experience. But, you know, if you look at it and you go to, say, the COO and you say to them, okay, I just want to understand what our invoice cost is. Like, how much does it cost us every load we book? Because every company has an invoice cost. I think if you don't understand that and you don't understand what the company as a core in the nucleus of the company does well, if a company says, oh, we do everything and we're the best at it, I think you got to be very cautious. And then take those two pieces of the puzzle and figure out what you're going to go after. You know, perfect example. If your company costs $75 to process an invoice, right? You might not want to go after plastic recyclers where you're going to make $100 a load.
Because, not even that, yes.
Right? Because you get 30% or 40% or 50 or 60% commission. So the company makes, you know, $70, $60, $40, $50. And if their cost of invoice is 75, it's only a matter of time before that there's a loss, right? And that
asking you to do business with this customer.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
So, see, Dan, I agree with where you're coming from. You know, what you can do and what's quite possible is to cut the timing down. You know, Nothing will ever substitute actual experience in front of the client. However, when we were starting out decades ago, the learning time that was required was in years. And uh, at some point, I felt that there could have been a better job done by cutting down that learning time.
Yeah.
So instead of us taking 3 years, and I'm quite slow, if you notice, it takes me a little bit of time to understand stuff. But me aside, if somebody's coming out and are fresh in the job, or just 2 to 3 years, 4 years in the job, starting with a new firm, just 2 or 3 months, 4 months of work with them would actually save them 2 to 3 years of experience time. They will still need to do the heavy lifting. They will still need to burn. The only thing that cannot be taught is rejection. I'm very strongly opinionated about it. I have had like so many discussions that, you are just born with it and it comes that it's nonsense. Yeah. I still struggle with rejection after doing this for such a long time. And if you don't, that means to a certain extent, you're not very passionate and you're not very motivated about what you're doing. Some guys do. There is a small percentage of the people who are like, they just get up and refresh the browser in the morning and they're totally fine. But that's a very small percentage. I never met a very motivated, very passionate salesperson who's not been impacted by rejection. Yeah. So that's one thing.
Especially if it's long term.
Yeah,
right? Especially long-term rejection. And
Especially
I think people these days are experiencing that rejection whiplash, I call it.
Correct.
Rejection hangover. Like, I'm very passionate about sales. I'm very passionate about helping salespeople achieve wicked dreams. And like this whole industry, I owe everything. I met my wife in this industry. I have a beautiful family because of this industry. Like everything I owe to this industry. And I'll tell you, these last 8 months are tough. Like constantly talking to myself going, I'm not a loser. I'm not a failure. It's just the market. Like, and when I was younger in my career, specifically through the 8-9 recession and into 10, I thought I just lost it. I was like, I lost my God-given gift, which it's not, but that was my perspective 20 years ago. And it was like, what's wrong? And I realized I just lost my passion for the industry. I didn't care about the industry anymore. And I mean, I know people, and I've done it before, where I've hung up the phone from a prospect and I'm like, no, hold on. I got to call it first, but they don't understand what I'm saying because I know I could, I know I can help them. I know I can help them. And they call back. And you're right. There's something to be said. You get rejected here and there, and it's one thing, but you get rejected for 6-7 months straight, and there's no traction, and you feel like nothing's connecting. That, from a mental health perspective, from an ambition, a drive, a confidence perspective, is devastating until you put it into perspective. But you're right, until you walk through that door, I don't think anybody has any. One thing. Good friend of mine, Andrea Waltz and Richard Fenton. I don't know if you've ever read the book Go for No. But Go for No teaches you that yes is the destination, but no is how you get there.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to go through a no or X amount of no's to get to a yes. So call it 1 out of 10 prospects says yes, let's talk. So you have to go through a no. And I remember one trick I did very early on in my career is I realized that every phone call I made was worth $5, because by the time I went through my phone calls and landed a customer, that customer was worth like $1,000 a month. So when I broke that down, that $1,000 over a month, and applied it to my sales calls, I realized that my prospecting calls were worth $5 a piece. So I actually I printed a $5 bill off the internet and I taped it to my phone. And that was my cue that every time I pick up the phone, I actually make $5. Now not necessarily like that is, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's very hard when you go through this lean period, Dan, and it's unteachable. You have to fundamentally believe in one thing, that the universe is watching.
I believe that.
There is no scientific way for me to explain this to anybody. You've had to live through that to understand it. Because once you get past that 7-8 months period, 10 months period, or whatever amount of time, all you need is the one thing to break. and then these 20 or 200 rejections that were happening, as if they were just sitting back and watching what's going to happen to you,
Yeah.
as if they were testing you. And then 5 of them come through the door behind that one person, which you had completely given up on. So,
it brings me to a great question, Vivek. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is really going to help people. What would you say? What strategy, what idea, what method would you share with salespeople today that are suffering from that? And I think if anything, if we can get a couple of salespeople to, really hear this message, I think that's going to be more value than we can ever give to anyone.
That's a very good question, Dan. And, back to as if the universe is watching. Today, you send 1,000 emails, response rate is less than 1. You make 100 phone calls and response rate is less than 1. Unbeknownst to a salesperson, the customer is still watching. The customer is still reading. The customer is actually still listening. Just because you do not have response, just because you do not have the feedback, doesn't mean that your voice is not being heard. So when you give up too soon, you have no way of knowing, and not to sound cliched, because you're like, oh, the guy next to me got it in 1 month. I'm already on day 45. What is not working for me? Your journey has no parallel. There is absolutely no one out there. If there are 50,000 sales guys or 500,000 sales guys in our industry in the United States, everybody is on their own journey. There is no comparison. Each one is individual. There is no way you have, no two people have the same DNA. So how can two people have the same journey? It's not possible. Here's an experiment I always talk about with customers, take identical twins. They went to the same school, they went to the same college, they went 2 years in business, and you bring them on the same day to your company to sell logistics services. After 1 year, their trajectory is going to be completely different. So on what grounds are you comparing your 50, 100, 200 sales guys? And why are sales guys comparing themselves to anybody else's journey? What's going to happen to you is not going to happen to anybody else. But the fundamental doesn't change. The universe is always, 100% of the time watching. And if you do the work, and that one day that 1% luck factor comes in, then that's it. Then that's a turning point. And you'll go through this in your career. To your point, Dan, we've gone through some extremely bad troughs, a minimum of 3 to 5 times. It's not the first rodeo. You always go through troughs. Everything you touch works, and then there comes a time where everything you touch just goddamn doesn't work. And then you question yourself. You do.